Texas Governor Greg Abbott has sent a busload of migrants to Vice President Kamala Harris's Washington, D.C. home. This as illegal crossing at the U.S.-Mexico border have plummeted after the expiration of Title 42, the pandemic-era rule that allowed officials to quickly expel asylum seekers at the border. Here's News Nation reporter Jorge Ventura reporting from El Paso, Texas. Let's watch.
Officials were expecting a huge spike in illegal crossings following the lifting of Title 42. Here in Texas, officials were anticipating up to 13,000 illegal crossings per day, but illegal crossings along the southern border have plummeted. This in the days leading up to the expiration of Title 42, Border Patrol agents apprehended more than 30,000 migrants in a 3-day span. CBP sources confirming to News Nation that Border Patrol agents apprehended roughly 6,300 migrants on Friday, the first day after the lifting of Title 42, and on Saturday, agents apprehended 4,300 migrants, a significant decrease compared to earlier in the week. Now, for migrants entering the U.S. now in between the ports of entry will now face stricter consequences that include deportation and a multi-year ban from re-entering the U.S. under the years-old Title 8 policy. Now, according to migrants who spoke to News Nation, human smugglers also communicated to migrants that stricter asylum restrictions are to come after May 11th, creating a pre-surge ahead of the lifting of Title 42.
So, of course, Title 42 was an old rule that Trump implemented that was intended to prevent viruses, pathogens from coming over the border, whatever border. And despite some other COVID-era policies, which folks have been very enthusiastic about coming to an end, there has been a reversal of the position on Title 42, whereas many people who lean conservative have wanted it to stay into effect, because what it meant is that people who were making asylum claims could be turned away despite our legal asylum process and more quickly discharged from the border without the same provisions that asylees are allotted. People anticipated that when Title 42 went away, that there was going to be this surge across the border. It seems like that is not, at least in the short term, the case. What do you make of this all, Liz?
I think we need to be drastically increasing the number of people we let seek asylum in the United States. I mean, fundamentally, we have people fleeing all kinds of countries that are just in states of utter chaos and disrepair. People fleeing Venezuela, people fleeing Cuba, people fleeing cartel violence in Mexico and El Salvador. It is hard not to look at this footage and see mothers holding young children. I saw one image that was, I believe, a mother or a father holding a 3-month-old child, effectively a newborn, attempting to cross the Rio Grande, holding the child up to ensure that they wouldn't be touching the water. Children going without diapers without clean diapers for days on end, waiting at the border, trying to be let into this country. I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to see anything other than a moral imperative to allow these people in and to improve our capacity to process these asylum claims. Libertarians like myself fundamentally believe in the free movement of people and goods across borders. And it is hard for me to look at this situation and, frankly, not get angry at conservatives who are anti-immigration or immigration restrictionists, and feel a certain sense that we have a profound moral duty to take care of these people and to process them quickly and in a way that is humane.
Yeah, Donald Trump was asked about this at the CNN town hall last week, and I think it was frustrating to some on the left that, you know, politicians across the political spectrum are able to give these answers that really tap into the kind of cultural lines around immigration and say, I do want 42, I don't want 42. I do want a wall, I don't want a wall. But very few are attendant to the causes of various immigration waves, including U.S. intervention and coup staging in countries like Venezuela, where the U.S. has been opposed to democratically elected, often left-leaning socialist governments, and as a consequence has longstanding sanctions that have really contributed to life being intolerable in those kinds of countries. I mean, what do you say, Liz, to folks that say America doesn't have the capacity to take on an infinite number of immigrants, that at some point some kind of metric has to be established, and that we can't have quote unquote open borders? Because I think there's going to be a lot of folks in the audience who say, well, who's going to stand up for the interests of Americans here?
Yeah, I really dislike that so much of this conversation has centered around the open borders rhetoric. I just don't think it is very concrete, very substantive, and very helpful. What I think at least my personal views are, we need to drastically increase all of our visa allotments, and we need to drastically increase the number of people who we let into this country and allow to seek asylum here. I'm talking, massive, massive increases. And I think it's fair to talk about how to scale up these amounts over time to ensure there's not, a huge shock to the system. But I think we would be better served by having a conversation that is more focused on how it is frequently in the best interests of Americans to let more and more migrants in. If you're a conservative who's worried about falling fertility rates and, the working women not having enough kids these days and this whole thing, or you're worried about declining religiosity among younger people, okay, well, who has on average, a lot of kids and attends church frequently? Mexican Catholics who are waiting at the border trying to be let in right now. I'm not saying we ought to give Mexican Catholics preferential treatment specifically, but I'm saying, like, on average, you look at, patriotism among many, many recent immigrants. You look at the degree to which so many people are entrepreneurial and hardworking and just looking to make a better life for their kids. I mean, look, I had a newborn recently. It is hard enough recovering from childbirth and taking care of a newborn. The idea of making a harrowing journey across the Rio Grande or across the desert in Arizona in order to attempt to get a better life for your kids. I mean, I can't even imagine how horrible their circumstances must be in their home countries for that risk to be assumed. My God. And then to possibly still be turned away at the border or still be caught and deported, to have to interact with coyotes and cartels and possibly pay people off. I mean, it just shows you the level of commitment to seeking a better life for their families. I mean, my God, do you see this as a moral imperative? What's your idea for how we ought to best handle this situation?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that has frustrated me a great deal, I was certainly not an immigration attorney, but I did have one pro bono immigration case that I handled, was the long period of time that folks have been complaining about the fact that there's not enough administrative and legal support at the border to handle these claims. So part of what gets missed, I think, in the conversation about Title 42 was that it created an expedited process because it circumvented what are our typical obligations, our legal obligations to process asylum claims and let people go through the legal process of making the case that they have been persecuted on the basis of their race or religion or political opinion or whatever, basis on which we are proud as a country usually of allowing people to escape where they've come from and come and make a new life in America. And Title 42 circumvented that process and allowed us to just say, we're not taking anybody in, there's a pandemic, goodbye. And so the fact that that is a basic capacity issue that has existed for years and decades, and there haven't been investments into actually processing those claims on the border is deeply frustrating. Moreover, as I mentioned before, I think the inattention to the role that American Foreign Policy has played in creating a number of these immigration crises needs to be focused on a lot more. And I think increasingly we're going to see that global environmental shifts cause mass migrations that are going to, create crises again at our borders. And so again and again, all of us, we live in a global world now. And the idea that there can be these historical senses of what a border is and what our global responsibilities are, it's just an anachronistic way of looking at things.
You're completely right, and I think you're totally right to talk about the border processing capacity and how a lot of people aren't aware of just how completely screwed up that system is. Reason Magazine a few years back ran a piece entitled "There Is No Line," and to me, this is the best way to sum up what's going on. Whether you're, applying for an H-1B visa, or whether you're a high-skilled worker or a low-skilled seasonal worker, whether you're seeking asylum, there's definitely a huge issue where I think people in their minds have this idea that there's a line and people need to lawfully immigrate and simply just get into the line. And it's like, it's not nearly that simple of a process at all. Many people attempt to do things the right way and don't actually get any sort of response and are dealing with glitchy apps at the border like what we're seeing right now. This is a horrible situation where there are so many people who don't want to break the law and don't want to enter the U.S. in an illegal manner and then have, a very tenuous situation. It's much harder to find work and much harder to find housing and much harder to get your kids enrolled in public schools if you did cross illegally. So they don't have an incentive they do have an incentive to cross illegally, I suppose, if it's the only thing available to them, if it's the last resort. But I think there are lots of people who don't want to do that. And I wish we offered them more legal pathways to come into this country.
Well, Liz, that does it for us today. I want to thank you so much for filling in for Robbie. It was a pleasure, as always, to host with you.
Thank you so much. It was great seeing you.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while you're on the move, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Take care. We'll see you tomorrow.